Welcome back to the Midnight Tapes. Get comfortable. Turn the lights down low, pull the blanket up, and let the rain settle in around you. Tonight, all 8 stories come from the desert. Before the first story, take one slow breath and imagine that road from a safe distance. Not as a place you are in, but as a strip of black ribbon somewhere far away, under a sky you do not have to look at. Imagine the windshield, the little trembling glow of the dashboard, the way the world outside becomes nothing but whatever the headlights choose to reveal. That is the feeling these stories share. Not panic at first. Not screaming. Just the quiet awareness that the next town is far behind, the next town is far ahead, and between them there are miles where ordinary rules feel less certain. The desert at night is honest in one way and deceptive in another. It shows you how small you are, which is honest. It also tells you that because you can see far, nothing can get close without your permission, and that is a lie. Distance can be crossed. Darkness can move. A light can approach for half an hour before you understand it is approaching you. A sign can persuade you to spend the fuel you needed to survive. A shape can stand on the shoulder and become the center of your whole mind. These are not quick fears. They are slow fears. They come across the open ground, patient enough to let you notice them. So listen gently. Let the stories pass like scenery beyond glass. You do not need to solve them. You do not need to look out at every horizon. You can stay under the blanket, with rain instead of dry wind, with walls instead of empty miles. The desert can have its roads for tonight. We will only borrow them for a while. There is a fear that belongs only to wide open empty places. It is not the same fear that waits in closets, or basements, or narrow halls. In those places, you are afraid of something close, something hidden, something pressed into a corner just outside the reach of the light. The fear of a small room is the fear that something is already near you. The desert is different. The desert gives you distance. It gives you the horizon, and the huge night sky, and miles of open ground where nothing should be able to hide. It gives you space enough to see danger coming. And then, slowly, it teaches you that seeing something far away is not always a comfort. Sometimes distance only means you have longer to watch it approach. Sometimes all that empty space is not empty at all. Sometimes it is only waiting to carry something toward you. There is one more thing about desert stories that people who live near cities often misunderstand. The frightening part is not always the monster, if monster is the right word. Sometimes the frightening part is the way the land gives the monster time. In a house, fear is sudden. A door opens. A floorboard creaks. A face appears at the window. But on a desert road, fear can begin as a speck 10 miles away. It can remain small for a long time. It can let you argue with yourself, make excuses, check the mirror, look again, laugh nervously, and then realize that the speck has doubled in size. The desert does not hurry because it does not have to. It has space enough for dread to mature. That is why the people in these stories often make the same mistake. They keep going. They keep watching. They keep answering. They keep following the sign, the figure, the voice, the light. Not because they are foolish, but because the desert makes continuing feel natural. The road already carries you forward. The engine already hums. The headlights already point somewhere. All fear has to do is place itself ahead of you, or beside you, or just beyond the reach of certainty, and let your own momentum deliver you to it. On lonely roads, curiosity and survival can look dangerously alike. And still, people cross those roads. They always have. Freight has to move. Families have to travel. Lovers leave towns, workers drive home, wanderers chase silence, and the desert accepts all of them without comment. Most pass safely. Most see nothing worse than strange shadows and tired thoughts. But now and then someone looks out into the open dark and sees that the emptiness has noticed them back. That is what tonight is about. Not the desert as a wasteland, but the desert as a watcher. A vast quiet place with patience older than highways, allowing our little vehicles to pass through, until one night, for reasons we may never understand, it chooses to answer. People who have never driven the desert at night imagine darkness as a wall. In the desert, darkness is an ocean. Your headlights carve out a little tunnel through it, and everything beyond that tunnel belongs to something older than roads. The ground is pale, the scrub is low, and the sky feels too large, as if the world has been stretched thin. You can drive for an hour without passing another car. You can stop, switch off the engine, and hear the blood in your own ears because the silence outside is too complete to be natural. And that is when the mind begins to do strange things. A light appears where no town should be. A sign promises a place that never comes. A voice answers on a radio no one else should be close enough to use. A figure stands on the shoulder of a road where no living person could have walked. At first you explain it. Everyone explains it. A mirage. Exhaustion. Reflections. A ranch road you missed on the map. Another traveler somewhere ahead or behind. The desert is famous for tricks, and it is always easier to blame the desert for what you saw than to admit that the desert might have been showing you the truth. These stories came from people who spent a night too long out in the empty places. Drivers, truckers, campers, and wanderers who learned that the spaces between towns are not empty just because they are unlit. They learned that the road is a line we have drawn across something that was already there. They learned that the headlights make you visible. They learned that lonely roads do not always leave you alone. You do not have to stay awake for all of them. Let your eyes close whenever they want to. You are not out in the desert tonight. You are not watching the fuel gauge drop on a road with no station for 100 miles. You are not alone beneath a sky so full of stars that some of them seem too bright, too still, too aware. You are home. There are walls close around you. There is rain soft on the roof. The door is locked. The dark is just the dark. Just do not stop the car for the lights in the distance. One final thing before the first headlights appear. If the stories begin to feel alike, that is because roads teach repeated lessons in different disguises. Do not mistake that for sameness. A light, a sign, a voice, a stranger, a star, a running shape beside the glass. Each is a different door in the same empty wall. Each asks for a different mistake. Look too long. Drive too far. Answer too honestly. Follow too kindly. Believe relief is near. The desert does not need many tricks, only the right one for the person passing through. And perhaps that is why these accounts stay with people. They are not only about what waited outside the car. They are about the moment a person realizes that their own best instincts can be used against them. Compassion makes you slow for the hitchhiker. Hope makes you follow the sign. Loneliness makes you answer the radio. Wonder makes you stare at the stars. The desert offers each feeling a shape, then waits to see whether you will call that shape safe. You can hear all of that from here without going there. That is the arrangement between us tonight. I will take the road, and you can stay in the room. I will look toward the horizon, and you can let your eyes close whenever they grow heavy. Nothing in these stories needs you to witness it directly. The desert is far away, and the rain is near. If your breathing has already slowed, good. Let the rhythm of it replace the rhythm of tires on pavement. Let the storm outside be the only weather that matters. The first road is waiting now, but it is only a road made of words, and words can pass safely through the dark without bringing anything back with them. And remember, If a line or image starts to feel too sharp, let the rain soften it. The tape is here to carry the fear for you, slowly and safely, until even the empty road becomes only a sound fading behind sleep. Nothing is required from you now except rest, and even that can arrive whenever it wants. The road can wait outside. Tonight you do not have to follow it anywhere. Let us begin. The lights that approach. Before I reached the town, there had been one smaller thing I did not understand until later. About 10 miles into the pursuit, I passed an old roadside pullout, the kind made of gravel and broken asphalt, with a sun-bleached information board that no longer held any information. My headlights swept over it for less than a second, but in that second I saw marks in the dust. Circles. Many circles, overlapping and dragged around one another, as though something with no wheels had moved there often, slowly, practicing turns. At the time, I was too frightened to process it. Later, lying awake in a motel room with every lamp on, I remembered those circles and understood that I was not the first car the lights had approached. That pullout had been used. Not by campers, not by ranchers. By whatever waited out beyond the road, learning the habits of vehicles, learning where drivers slowed, where they stopped to stretch, where they stepped out under the stars and became easier to reach. I asked about the lights at the gas station, because fear makes people either silent or foolish, and I was foolish enough to want confirmation. The clerk was a young man with headphones around his neck and a bored expression that vanished when I described the cluster. He did not ask if I had been drinking. He did not smile. He looked past me, through the glass doors, toward the dark edge of town where the desert began. Then he said his grandfather called them widow lights, though nobody knew why. He said they were seen only from cars that were alone. They never bothered convoys, never came close to towns, and never crossed into full electric light. People used to think they were lanterns carried by miners, or spirits, or swamp gas, though there were no swamps and no mines in that direction. His grandfather believed they were older than the road, older than the town, and that they had learned the meaning of headlights by watching us. The clerk told me there had been disappearances on that stretch, but he said it the way locals say such things when they know outsiders will not believe them. Cars found parked neatly on the shoulder, engines cold, doors open. No blood. No tracks beyond the first few steps into the desert, and sometimes not even those. In one case, years before, a family had abandoned a station wagon with all the luggage still inside and the radio playing. The youngest child's shoes were on the back seat. The official story was that they had gotten lost on foot after engine trouble. The clerk looked at me when he said that and waited for me to understand how little sense it made for an entire family to walk barefoot into open desert at night. For months afterward, I dreamed of the cluster stopped at the edge of town. In the dreams, it did not chase me. It simply waited beyond the last pool of light, pale points trembling slightly, as if with restrained eagerness. The town would be silent, all the houses dark except the gas station, and I would know that eventually someone would turn the pumps off, or dawn would fail to come, or I would have to drive out again. That was the true shape of the fear, not that the lights were fast, but that they were patient. They did not need to catch everyone. They only needed to wait for one person to be alone, tired, curious, and just far enough from the safety of human brightness. I was driving across the desert at night, on one of those long, ruler-straight highways that seem less built than drawn. The road ran ahead of me in a black line, vanishing into a darkness so wide that my headlights felt almost useless. They showed me a few seconds of pavement, a few pale shoulders of sand and brush, and then everything beyond that belonged to the night. There were no houses, no service roads, no radio stations coming in clearly. There was only the engine, the hiss of tires, and the thin beam of light carrying me forward through miles of nothing. I had always liked that drive. I know that sounds strange, because most people hate desert roads after dark. They find them lonely, and I suppose they are. But I used to find that loneliness peaceful. There was a freedom in it. No traffic, no towns, no clutter of signs and storefronts. Just the wide empty land and the sky laid out overhead. On clear nights, the stars felt close enough to lean down over the windshield. I would drive with one hand on the wheel and the other around bad gas station coffee, thinking about nothing at all, letting the road unwind. That night, I was several hours into the crossing and more than an hour from the nearest real town when I saw the lights. They were far off to my right, low on the horizon, out beyond the road, where the land flattened into black desert. At first they seemed like a cluster of ranch lights or a small settlement, the kind of isolated place that exists in the empty country and shows up on no tourist map. I noticed them because there was nothing else to notice. A handful of pale points, maybe 10 or 12, close together, hovering just above the dark line of the ground. I remember feeling relieved for a second. Human lights do that to you in lonely places. Even when they are miles away, even when you have no intention of stopping, they remind you that the world still contains people. They remind you that if something happened, if your engine died or your tire blew, there might be a porch light somewhere, a phone, a door someone could open. Then I remembered there was nothing out there. I knew that road. Not casually. I had driven it many times. To the right, for 50 miles at least, there was only open desert. No ranches. No service buildings. No mining operation. No little town tucked behind a ridge. The land was empty. I had looked at the maps. I had even stopped in daylight along that stretch once and stared out at that same direction, seeing nothing but low scrub and heat shimmer all the way to the horizon. The lights should not have been there. Still, I did what people do. I explained them. Maybe they were farther than they looked. Maybe I had misjudged the angle. Maybe they were on the highway ahead of me and the flatness made them seem off to the side. Maybe some off-road convoy was out there, people with light bars on their vehicles, crossing the desert for fun. I held that explanation for less than a minute. Because the lights moved. Not the way a town's lights shift when you pass them, not the way distant headlights travel along a road. They moved as a single cluster, sliding slowly across the black ground. They did not bounce. They did not scatter. They did not divide into vehicles. They glided, low and silent, all of them together, like a little constellation detached from the sky and set loose on the desert floor. And they were not moving parallel to me. They were coming closer. I felt the first real coldness of fear then, a clean sudden line down my back. I sat forward in the seat, both hands on the wheel, and watched the lights out of the corner of my eye. The road stayed straight. My headlights poured ahead. The cluster remained far out to the right, but its angle was changing. It was crossing the open land, not toward the road generally, but toward the place where my road and its path would meet. Toward me. I increased my speed a little. Not dramatically. I told myself not to panic. If it was some kind of vehicle, it might simply be driving toward a crossing or a dirt track I could not see. If it was nothing, if it was an illusion, speeding up would not matter. I watched the speedometer climb. 65. 70. The engine hummed a little harder. The lights changed course. That was what convinced me. They adjusted smoothly, as if they had noticed my change in speed and corrected their path to intercept me farther ahead. No hesitation. No delay. The whole cluster simply angled differently, and continued its silent progress over land that no road crossed. I turned off the radio, though nothing had been playing but static. The inside of the car became very quiet. The tires sounded too loud. My breathing sounded too loud. I could see the lights now not only as points but as small, distinct glows, each one pale and steady. They were not headlights. There were too many of them, and they sat too low, and they were arranged wrong. Headlights come in pairs. Light bars make lines. These were scattered in an irregular pattern, close enough to belong together, but not symmetrical enough to belong to a machine. For a horrible moment, I imagined them as eyes. Not two eyes, but many. Small pale eyes held low to the ground, all moving together. I pressed the gas harder. The desert beside me blurred into darkness. My headlights shook slightly on the asphalt. The road was so empty and straight that speed felt unreal, like the car was fixed in place and the world was sliding beneath it. The lights kept coming. They gained across the open desert in a way no off-road vehicle could have managed. There was no dust cloud, no engine noise, no bounce over rocks and washes. Just that smooth, deliberate glide. When they were close enough that I could see them clearly through the passenger window, my mind refused them. It did not form a shape around them. It could not. The lights were attached to something, or carried by something, or perhaps they were the something itself. They hung in a loose cluster, maybe the size of a small house, moving inches above the ground. The darkness between them seemed thicker than the darkness around them, a black mass that ate the starlight. Once, one of the lights blinked out and came back in a slightly different place, as though it had shifted on whatever body carried it. I said out loud to the empty car, "No. It is strange what fear does to speech." I was not saying it to anyone. I was not even saying it to the lights. I was saying it to the world, refusing the version of the world in which this could happen. The lights reached the highway behind me. I did not see them cross the road because I was driving too fast and refusing to look in the mirror. But I felt, in some animal way, that they had reached the asphalt. The hair on my arms lifted. The car seemed suddenly too fragile, too thin, just glass and metal moving through a place that had no reason to protect me. I looked in the rearview mirror despite myself. They were behind me now. The cluster had turned, not onto the road exactly, but along it, floating just beyond the shoulder, keeping pace. For a while it stayed back, perhaps 100 yards behind and to the right. Then it gained. Then it fell back. Then it gained again. It moved the way a dog might test the edge of a fence, not because it could not cross, but because it had not decided yet whether to bother. I drove faster than I have ever driven in my life. The speedometer passed 90. The car trembled. Every sensible part of me screamed that I would die if an animal ran into the road, if a tire burst, if there was a curve hidden ahead. But the road remained straight, and the lights remained behind me, and fear made the decision for me. The chase lasted for 20 miles. Maybe more. Time behaved strangely. I remember snippets. My hands cramping on the wheel, the taste of metal in my mouth, the fuel needle trembling, the lights swelling in the mirror and then shrinking, as if whatever carried them was toying with the distance. Once they came so close that the inside of my car filled with a faint, cold glow from the passenger side, and I thought I heard a sound under the engine noise, not a voice, not a hum, but the soft dry whisper of thousands of grains of sand sliding over something smooth. Then, ahead I saw the glow of a real town. Not a cluster on the horizon, not something off-road, not a promise in the dark. A real town, marked on maps, with a gas station, street lights, sodium lamps, electric signs, and the visible orange halo of people keeping the night back. I nearly sobbed when I saw it. The lights behind me slowed. They did not vanish. That would have been easier. They simply stopped at the edge of the town's glow, out in the desert beyond the last spill of human light. I could see them in the mirror, hanging there, watching, unable or unwilling to come closer. The real lights of the town touched the desert around them, and the cluster remained just beyond that boundary, pale and patient. I drove into the town and stopped at the first lit gas station. I parked under the brightest pump island and sat with the engine running until my legs stopped shaking enough for me to stand. The clerk looked at me strangely when I came in. I must have looked like a man who had escaped something. Maybe I had. I stayed there until dawn. I drank burnt coffee from a paper cup and watched the windows. Once, near 4 in the morning, I thought I saw a pale flicker far beyond the last buildings, out where the desert began again. But it did not approach. Not while the human lights were still on. I do not drive that road at night anymore. If I must cross the desert, I plan my route by daylight, and I stop before sunset, no matter how inconvenient it is. Friends have laughed at me for that. They ask what I think will happen if I drive after dark. I do not tell them. I only say that the desert has strange lights. And when I do find myself on an empty road after sunset, when the horizon is black and the sky is too wide, I keep my eyes forward. I do not look out to the sides. I do not search for ranch lights or distant towns. Because I know now that some lights are not places. Some lights are not vehicles. Some lights are not meant to guide you home. Some lights wait far out in the empty places for a single moving thing to pass. And then, silently, across all that darkness, they begin to approach. The storm is still outside the window. Stay with me. You are doing fine. The town that's always 1 more mile. After the rancher left me with enough fuel to reach the next real town, I drove in daylight with the windows down, needing air, needing proof that the desert was only desert. In the sun, everything looked harmless, almost embarrassed by what had happened in the dark. The road was ordinary pavement. The shoulders were scattered with broken glass and dry weeds. There were lizards warming themselves on rocks. I passed no signs for mercy. Not one. The only markers were county signs, unreadable old posts, and a bent speed limit sign with bullet holes through the numbers. I began to wonder if I had dreamed some of it, though the empty tank and my raw nerves said otherwise. At the next town, I found a library because I needed records more than I needed food. The librarian was old enough to remember when people still asked questions about old settlements. When I said the name Mercy, she stopped moving for a moment, then pushed her glasses higher on her nose and asked where I had heard it. I told her I had seen signs. She sighed, not with surprise, but with the exhaustion of someone hearing the same bad news in a new voice. She brought me a folder from a local history cabinet. Inside were photocopied maps, newspaper clippings, and one photograph so faded that the buildings looked like ghosts even in daylight. Mercy had been a company town built around a silver claim that failed almost immediately. The name, according to one clipping, had been a joke among the miners because the place had none. Water was scarce, wages were worse, and the road in was difficult. When the mine closed, the owner supposedly promised the workers a final supply wagon if they stayed 1 more week to secure the equipment. The wagon never came. Several men tried to walk out. Some were found. Some were not. The last recorded mention of the town was a note from a county surveyor who wrote that the remaining inhabitants had refused to leave because they were expecting relief any day. The librarian said the stories began after automobiles became common. Drivers would see signs for Mercy only at night, usually when they needed something badly. Gas, water, help, shelter. The signs used what the traveler lacked. Sometimes they promised a station, sometimes a clinic. Once, in the 30s, a man swore he saw signs for Mercy Hospital after his wife went into labor on the road. He followed them until his car overheated. He survived, she did not. The official explanation was panic and poor navigation. But the librarian tapped the folder and said the road to Mercy had always been good at making people believe relief was close. The worst part was a handwritten note clipped to the back of the folder. It was from a highway worker in the 1960s, complaining about unauthorized signs appearing on the desert road. He wrote that crews removed them repeatedly, only to find new ones up the next morning, always pointing toward land where no road existed. His final sentence read, "They look old when we take them down, but they were not there the day before." Reading that, I felt again the dark car around me, the fuel gauge on empty, the phrase "one more mile" blooming in my head like a command. I closed the folder and thanked the librarian. She asked if I had stopped. When I said yes, she reached across the desk and squeezed my hand, as if I had told her I had survived an illness. I was driving through remote desert country, low on gas, when I saw the sign. It stood on the right shoulder, tilted slightly, its paint sun-faded even in my headlights. A town ahead. Mercy, 12 miles. Beneath the name was the little symbol everyone hopes to see in the middle of nowhere, a gas pump. I remember the relief so clearly that it still embarrasses me. I actually laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because the tightness in my chest loosened all at once. My fuel light had been on for 15 minutes. I had miscalculated badly, trusting an old paper map and a memory of a station that had apparently closed years before. The desert is not forgiving of small mistakes. A low tank becomes a problem quickly when there are no houses, no traffic, and no cell service. So when that sign appeared, I felt saved. Mercy, 12 miles? It sounded like a joke from a better universe. Mercy. The exact thing I needed. I eased off the gas a little, trying to conserve what remained, and kept going. The road was a 2-lane ribbon through flat desert, with low black hills far away and a sky so empty it made the headlights seem small. I watched the odometer. 12 miles was nothing. 10 minutes, maybe less. I pictured a dusty little town, one pump, a sleepy clerk behind a counter, maybe a vending machine and a bathroom with a broken lock. I promised myself I would fill the tank completely. I promised myself I would never again pass a station in the desert just because the gauge said I had enough. I drove 12 miles. There was no town. There was only another sign. Mercy, 11 miles. At first I was annoyed, not frightened. Road signs are imprecise in rural places. Maybe the first had been placed before an old junction. Maybe the town limits began earlier than the center. Maybe I had misread the odometer. I was tired. The night was long. The fuel gauge was the only thing making me uneasy. I drove on. After several more miles, another sign appeared. Mercy, 10 miles. Good, I thought. Progress. Irritation faded back into relief. I leaned close to the wheel and scanned the darkness ahead for any hint of town glow. There was none, but small desert towns often sit low and dark until you are nearly on top of them. I kept driving. Then came another sign. Mercy, 10 miles. The same distance. I stared at it as I passed, my mind snagging on the number. I checked the odometer again. I had driven at least 3 miles since the last sign. The fuel needle had sunk lower. The road had not turned. The desert had not changed. Another 5 minutes. Mercy, 11 miles. That was when fear entered quietly, not as panic, but as a cold mathematical wrongness. 11 miles? The number had gone up. I slowed, almost without meaning to, and watched the sign shrink in the rearview mirror. It stood there in the headlights' fading spill, ordinary, weathered, and impossible. I told myself I had passed a different road. I told myself there must be a loop, a junction, an old alignment. But there had been no turnoff. No dirt track. No curve. Just the same road, straight through the dark, and the signs to Mercy appearing at intervals, promising a town that refused to arrive. The next sign said Mercy, 9 miles. I gripped the wheel so hard my fingers hurt. 9 was good. 9 meant the numbers could go down. 9 meant I was not trapped. I whispered, "Okay," and kept going. The gauge was below empty now, the needle resting on the peg, but engines have reserves. Everyone knows that. A car can go farther than the gauge says. It had to. Mercy, 8 miles. Then Mercy, 8 miles again. Then Mercy, 12 miles. I nearly drove off the road when I saw that one. The signs kept coming, and the town stayed ahead. Always ahead. Sometimes closer, sometimes farther, but never there. I drove for an hour toward a town 12 miles away and did not reach it. The odometer climbed. The fuel disappeared. The landscape remained the same, as if the road were sliding beneath me while the desert held me still. The signs became less like information and more like a voice. Mercy, 7 miles. Mercy, 10 miles. Mercy, 1 more mile. That sign should have comforted me most. It did the opposite. Because after 1 more mile, there should have been lights. Buildings. A reduction in the speed limit. A mailbox. A fence. A driveway. Something. I drove that mile with my heart in my throat, expecting the town to appear at any second. The next sign said Mercy, 1 more mile. Not 1 mile. 1 more mile. That phrase broke something in me. I realized then that I was not driving toward a place. I was being led by a promise. The town was not ahead in the way towns are ahead. It was bait on a line, and the line was the road, and I was following it because I needed what it promised. Gas. Light. People. Safety. Mercy. The engine coughed. A single hiccup, then smoothness again. My whole body went cold. I lifted my foot slightly, trying to stretch the last fumes, but another cough came, longer this time. The car shuddered. The headlights dimmed for a fraction of a second, and the desert beyond them seemed to lean in. I could have kept going. That was the trap. Every instinct said to keep going. If the town was 1 more mile ahead, stopping was madness. If I stopped, I might die out there. If I drove just 1 more mile, maybe the station would appear. 1 more mile. 1 more sign. 1 more chance. The engine coughed again. And then, from somewhere deeper than reason, I understood the rule of the thing. It wanted movement. It wanted me to spend the last of my fuel chasing the promise. After that, it would want me on foot, walking toward the lights I thought I saw, walking toward the sign that said 1 more mile, walking until the road ended, or until I did. So I did the only thing that did not fit the pattern. I stopped. I pulled onto the shoulder, put the car in park, and turned the key. The engine died with a final shiver. The headlights remained on for a moment, illuminating pale gravel, a signpost ahead, and nothing else. Then I switched them off too. Darkness folded over the car. It was one of the hardest things I have ever done, sitting there and not moving. The desert outside was vast and close at the same time. Without the engine, I could hear small ticks as the car cooled, and beyond that, silence. No insects. No wind. No distant traffic. I locked the doors even though there was no one around, and I kept my hands in my lap so I would not turn the key again. After a few minutes, a faint glow appeared ahead. Not headlights. Not town lights exactly. More like the suggestion of a lit place behind a low rise. Warm, yellow, inviting. It had not been there when my headlights were on. I stared at it through the windshield and felt hope rise in me like a sickness. Mercy. The word came to me without thought. Then, from the dark roadside, I heard metal creak. I turned my head slowly. The sign beside the road was changing. I could not see it clearly in the dark, but I heard the dry scrape of something rotating on old bolts. When the moon slid out from behind a thin cloud, I could make out the shape of it. The sign that had faced traffic now faced me. Its letters were barely visible. Mercy, 1 more mile. I closed my eyes. I do not know how long I sat that way. Hours, I think. The glow ahead remained. Sometimes it seemed closer. Sometimes I heard, or imagined I heard, faint music carried on air that did not move. Once I thought I smelled gasoline, sharp and beautiful. Once I thought I heard a bell over a door, the sound of someone entering a little station, and a friendly voice saying, "We were wondering when you'd arrive." I did not open the door. Before dawn, the glow faded. The sky went from black to gray, and with the gray came the ordinary desert. Scrub. Sand. Telephone poles leaning along the road. No town. No lights. No sign ahead. The sign beside me was blank on one side and rusted on the other, so old that whatever it once said had been erased by years of sun. A ranch truck appeared just after sunrise, the first real vehicle I had seen all night. The driver stopped, suspicious at first, then kind. He gave me gas from a can in the bed of his truck. When I asked about Mercy, his face changed. He told me there was no town called Mercy anywhere on that road. There had been a settlement by that name once, he said, back when mines and rail spurs came and went like fevers. It had been abandoned 100 years. Its remains were somewhere out beyond the hills, not on the highway, not reachable by any paved road. People had claimed to see signs for it at night. Usually people low on gas. Usually people tired enough to follow instructions. Sometimes their cars were found empty. Sometimes not even that. He told me I had done right by stopping. "Roads out here," he said, tightening the gas cap on my car, "don't always take you where they point after dark." I thanked him, drove back the way he told me to drive, and did not look for Mercy in the rearview mirror. Sometimes, even now, when I am tired and driving late, I think of that sign. 1 more mile. It is a phrase that can destroy you if you believe it at the wrong time. 1 more mile toward relief. 1 more mile toward safety. 1 more mile toward the town that knows exactly what you need and promises it until you have nothing left. If you ever find yourself on a desert road at night, low on gas, and the signs begin to disagree with the miles, do not argue with them. Do not try to win the distance. Do not chase the town. Stop while you still can. Because Mercy is always ahead. And it is always 1 more mile. You are safe here. The rain is still falling. Let your eyes rest if they want to. The hitchhiker on the empty road. The next morning, in the truck stop parking lot, I inspected the front of my car as if evidence might be caught there. Dust disturbed in some unusual pattern. A strand of fabric. Anything. There was nothing. But the tires had picked up fine pale sand that was not on the pavement where I had stopped for coffee. It clung to the tread in a way that made no sense because I had not left the road. I convinced myself it came from the shoulder during my panic turn, and maybe that is true. But when I watched the car later, the sand gathered in the driveway in small crescent shapes, like footprints that had been ground down and carried with me. For years I tried to decide whether the hitchhiker was a single thing or a role the desert gives to many things. The figure itself had no details I could trust. Every time I replayed it, the clothing changed. Sometimes I remembered a coat, sometimes a shirt, sometimes no clothing at all, just a human outline standing in the half-light. What remained constant was the gesture. Thumb out. Body asking to be approached. Head watching the destination. That contradiction felt intentional, like a lure designed for the part of a person that wants to help and the part that wants to know. I found mentions of it later in roadside folklore. Not under one name, of course. Stories like that travel poorly because they sound too simple. A driver sees a hitchhiker who cannot be reached. A traveler follows a figure always just ahead. Someone leaves the road after a person who seems lost. The endings differ depending on who tells them. Sometimes the driver wakes at dawn miles from the car with no memory of walking. Sometimes the vehicle is found with the engine idling and the driver's door open. Sometimes there are two sets of footprints leading into the desert, and only one set coming back, though never the driver's. The details change, but the geometry remains, the figure ahead, the distance preserved, the invitation to continue. What frightens me now is not only that it led me. It is how willingly I followed. No force held my foot on the gas. No voice commanded me. The hitchhiker did not need to threaten or beg. It simply gave my attention somewhere to go. That is a deeper danger than violence. The desert strips the world down until one strange thing can fill all of it. A figure on the shoulder becomes a question, the question becomes a task, and the task becomes the only reason you are driving. By the time you realize you are no longer traveling your own road, you may have already spent the miles you needed to get back. I sometimes wonder whether the thing knew I had turned around. Whether, out in the dark, after stepping off the shoulder, it paused and watched my taillights recede. I imagine it standing among the scrub, head still turned toward the destination it had chosen for me, patient enough to wait for another car, another conscience, another lonely driver who cannot bear to pass a figure in need. Maybe it does not mind losing one. Maybe the game is old, and roads are plentiful, and sooner or later someone will keep coming. Someone always wants to see what waits just ahead. Desert highways are the loneliest roads there are, and on the loneliest of them I picked up a hitchhiker. Except I did not. That is the simplest way I can say it. I first saw the figure at dusk, when the desert was losing color but the sky still held a thin line of red along the horizon. I had been driving for hours with no company but the dashboard lights. The road was empty in both directions, a two-lane strip running through land so flat that distance became meaningless. Things looked close and then remained far away for 20 minutes. Hills hovered. Telephone poles clicked by like slow metronomes. The only sign of life was the occasional rabbit frozen at the edge of the headlights before vanishing into scrub. Then, far ahead, on the right shoulder, I saw someone standing with a thumb out. My first thought was anger. Not at the person, exactly, but at the situation. Who hitchhikes there? Who stands on that road that late, that far from any town, as if a car might come every 5 minutes? There was no gas station behind me for 70 miles, no town ahead for nearly 100. The evening temperature was dropping fast. The desert can cook you in daylight and freeze you after sunset. Leaving someone out there felt like murder. I slowed. I did not want to. I have never been the kind of person who picks up strangers. I have heard all the same warnings everyone has. But the figure was alone in a place where aloneness is dangerous, and I could not simply pass by without at least checking. As I approached, I leaned forward, trying to see details. A coat. A hat maybe. One arm extended. Head angled down. But as I slowed, the figure was suddenly farther away. Not gone. Not moved in a way I saw. Just farther ahead than it should have been. I frowned and kept driving. The road was straight. There was no curve to distort distance, no dip where the person could have disappeared and reappeared. I accelerated gently to close the gap. The figure remained a quarter mile ahead, thumb out, waiting. For several minutes, I thought I was misjudging the distance. Dusk does that. The desert does that. The mind struggles when there are no buildings, no trees, no ordinary objects to measure against. I told myself the hitchhiker was farther away than I had first assumed. Then I looked at the odometer. I had driven 2 miles since first slowing. The hitchhiker was still a quarter mile ahead. A strange irritation took over. Fear had not arrived yet. Instead there was this stubborn, foolish need to solve the trick. I sped up. The figure stayed ahead. I slowed almost to a stop. The figure did not fall behind. It remained up the road, as if the road itself were moving it away from me at exactly the rate necessary to keep the distance constant. I laughed once, sharply, without humor. "All right," I said to the empty car. "What are you?" The figure did not answer. It stood on the shoulder with its thumb out, patient and still. I should have turned around then. That would have been the wise thing. The road behind me was empty too, but at least it was known. I had already survived it. But desert roads create their own hypnosis. The center line pulses beneath you. The headlights narrow the world to a strip. The figure ahead becomes a point your mind cannot release. You think, just a little closer. Just enough to see. Just enough to understand. I drove faster. The sky darkened completely. My headlights took over. The hitchhiker appeared in their farthest reach as a pale shape on the shoulder. Every time I gained, the distance stretched. Every time I looked away and back, it remained there, exactly where it had been, offering its thumb to a car that could never reach it. After 20 miles of this, fear finally arrived. It came when I realized I no longer knew where I was. Not geographically. I still knew the route number, the direction, the general map in my head. But I had become so focused on the figure that I had stopped noticing landmarks, mile markers, the passage of time. I was not traveling to my destination anymore. I was chasing. The road had become a tunnel, and at the end of it was a patient shape calling me forward without moving. I eased off the gas. The figure stayed ahead. I considered stopping, but stopping felt impossible. The thought of sitting still on that road while the hitchhiker remained in sight made my skin crawl. I imagined it lowering its thumb, turning, waiting, or worse, beginning to walk back toward me. So I kept going, slower now, trying to think. The rational mind is useless in moments like that, but it tries. Maybe it was a reflective road sign. Maybe a post. Maybe a trick of shadows. But signs do not hold out thumbs. Posts do not remain exactly beyond reach. Then I saw it clearly. For one brief moment, because of a slight rise in the road and a stronger press on the gas, my headlights caught the figure with more detail than before. The body faced the road in the posture of a hitchhiker. One arm extended, thumb raised, coat hanging still in air that did not move. But the head was wrong. The head was turned completely away from me. Not slightly, not looking down the road in both directions the way someone waiting for a ride might. Turned all the way around, facing forward, looking up the highway ahead. The body was asking me to stop. The head was watching where it was leading me. I understood then that it had never wanted a ride. It wanted me to follow. My foot hit the brake before thought could interfere. The car jolted, tires screaming for a second on cold pavement. I came to a stop in the middle of the road, chest heaving, both hands locked on the wheel. The headlights illuminated empty asphalt between me and the figure a quarter mile ahead. The hitchhiker remained still. For a long time, nothing happened. The engine idled. My headlights hummed faintly. Somewhere in the dashboard, a loose piece of plastic rattled. The figure stood on the shoulder, thumb raised, head turned toward whatever lay ahead in the dark. I put the car in reverse, just for a second, not moving yet. The hitchhiker lowered its thumb. Slowly. There was something worse about that than any sudden movement could have been. It was not angry. It was not startled. It was acknowledging that I had understood. The extended arm fell to its side. The head remained facing forward. Then it stepped off the shoulder. Not onto the road. Away from it. Into the desert. It walked out into the scrub, into ground no person could navigate safely in the dark. It did not stumble. It did not use a light. It moved with the ease of something returning home. Within a few seconds, it was beyond the reach of my headlights, but I could still see the pale shape for a while, drifting farther out into the black land. And I knew, with a certainty that has never left me, that if I had continued chasing it, the road would eventually have given me a reason to stop. A stalled engine. A sudden obstacle. A sign. A turn. Something. Then the figure would have led me off the pavement, just a little way at first, close enough that I could still see the car, then farther, following that pale shape through the brush because help, or answers, or the person I thought I was saving, was always just ahead. I turned the car around. There was no shoulder wide enough, so I did it badly, a 3-point turn in the middle of the empty highway, tires crunching gravel, the rear of the car swinging toward the darkness where the figure had gone. I did not look out the side window. I drove back the way I had come for nearly 100 miles, until I found a different route, a truck stop, and human voices. I told one person about it, an old woman working the counter at that truck stop. I do not know why. Maybe because she looked like she had lived her whole life beside roads like that, and had heard enough to know when not to laugh. She listened. Then she said, "Some things out here don't chase. They let you do the walking." That sentence has stayed with me. Because chasing looks like pursuit from the outside. From the inside, it often feels like choice. Curiosity. Compassion. The desire to help a stranger. The need to know what you saw. The road gives you all the excuses you need, and the figure stays ahead, patient, letting you spend your own fuel, your own attention, your own fear. I still drive at night sometimes. Life does not arrange itself around old terrors. But I do not stop for hitchhikers on empty desert roads, and if I see someone ahead on the shoulder, thumb out under the stars, I slow only long enough to check one thing. Which way the head is facing. If it is watching the road ahead instead of the car behind it, I turn around. Because that one is not trying to get a ride. That one is trying to give you a destination. And the destination is somewhere off the road, in the empty dark. If your eyes are closed now, let them stay closed. You do not need the road for this next one. The thing that crosses the highway. For a long time, I avoided describing the thing's face because face is too human a word. It had features, but features do not always make a face. There were hollows where eyes might be, a ridge that suggested a nose, a mouth or seam or shadow too narrow and too still. What made it terrible was not ugliness. It was the absence of any effort to resemble us. Many frightening things in stories imitate people badly. This thing had not bothered. It existed according to itself, and if I saw a man-like shape in it, that was my mind trying to survive the sight. The truck stop conversation stayed with me more than the crossing itself in some ways. One driver told me that years earlier a man had stopped after seeing a pale thing on the highway, thinking he had hit it. His rig was found half a mile down the road with the hazard lights blinking and the driver's door open. He was found at sunrise walking barefoot along the shoulder, not injured but unable to speak for 2 days. When he finally did, he said only that the thing had been studying the engine, and then studying him. He quit driving after that. Another driver claimed the crossings happened more often near old dry lake beds, places where water used to be, places that had held reflections before there were roads. The old hands had rules, and like all serious road rules, they were practical rather than dramatic. Do not stop with your headlights full on it. Dim if you can, because bright attention may be taken as challenge. Do not sound the horn. Sound carries strangely out there. Do not say anything about it over an open radio while you are still near the place. Names and descriptions have weight, and the desert does not need help remembering. Above all, do not return at the same hour the next night. The road may be ours by day, they said, but night schedules belong to other things. I broke one small rule without realizing it. After I saw the thing, before I reached the truck stop, I spoke aloud in the cab. I said, "What were you?" I said it several times. I was asking myself, but the cab was not sealed from the world in the way I wanted it to be. A truck is metal, glass, rubber, vibration. It moves through darkness like a drum. The words felt foolish once I remembered them. For weeks, whenever I drove near that region, I had the uneasy sense that something had heard not the question itself, but the interest inside it. Years later, retired, I saw a nature documentary about animals using established paths across landscapes changed by humans. Deer paths becoming road crossings. Migration trails cut by highways. Creatures returning to routes older than our maps. The narrator spoke gently about adaptation. I had to turn it off. All I could think was that perhaps the thing I saw was not an intruder on the road. The road was the intruder on its path. It had crossed there before asphalt, before trucks, before headlights, and that night it paused not because I had found something impossible, but because something impossible had found me in its way. I drove long haul through desert country for years, and the night roads out there show you things. Every driver has a category system for what the road offers after midnight. There are the things you can explain immediately: jackrabbits, coyotes, road signs, trash bags caught on brush, headlights bending strangely through heat left over from the day. There are the things you explain later because you need to sleep: exhaustion, reflections in the windshield, too much caffeine, not enough food. Then there are the things you do not explain. You set them aside. You keep driving. You learn not to bring them up unless the person listening has the right kind of silence. Truckers who run the desert long enough all hear about the crossings. Not animals crossing. Not migrants, not ranchers, not people whose cars broke down. The other crossings. The things that step from one side of the road to the other in the deepest part of the night, where there are no towns and no fences and no reason for anything upright to be moving under the stars. I used to laugh at those stories. Not because I thought the men telling them were liars, exactly, but because the road breeds stories the way standing water breeds mosquitoes. A man alone in a cab for 11 hours needs something to talk about. I had seen enough strange shadows to know how easily fear can shape a half-second glimpse. Then I got my own glimpse. It was just after 3 in the morning on a stretch of highway I had driven many times. The road cut through flat desert, pale in the moonlight, with low ridges far away like the backs of sleeping animals. There was no traffic, no rest area, no buildings. Nothing but my truck, my high beams, and the white lines ticking under the hood. I was tired but not dangerously so. I remember that because I have questioned it 1,000 times. I had slept well the day before. I had coffee, but not too much. The cab was warm. The radio was low. I was alert enough to notice a tumbleweed on the shoulder half a mile ahead and a dead coyote farther back. I was not dreaming. Ahead, something stepped onto the road. At first, my mind filed it under animal. Large animal. Deer, maybe, though deer were rare out there. Elk was impossible, but not more impossible than the shape in front of me. It came from the left, moving out of the scrub and onto the pavement with long, deliberate steps. I eased off the accelerator and touched the brake, giving it room. Then my high beams caught it fully. It stopped in the center of the highway. Every part of me rejected what I saw. It was upright, or close enough to upright that the word tried to apply. Too tall for a man. Too thin for an animal. Its limbs were long and pale, jointed wrong, not broken exactly, but arranged according to a plan that did not belong to anybody I knew. The knees bent a little too far back, or perhaps there were extra joints below them. The arms hung nearly to the road. The head sat on a narrow neck, and the angle of it suggested listening before seeing. Its skin, if it was skin, was gray-white and dull, the color of roots pulled from deep under a rock. Not albino. Not reflective. Colorless because the sun had never touched it. That was the impression that struck me most powerfully and most absurdly. Not that it was pale, but that it belonged to some place where daylight did not go. I brought the truck almost to a crawl. The thing turned its head. There was no panic in it. No startled freeze of an animal trapped by headlights. No human fear. It looked at my truck with curiosity. Patient, evaluating curiosity. It seemed to take in the grille, the lights, the height of the cab, and then, somehow, me behind the windshield. I felt seen in a way I had never felt seen by a person. A person looks at you and understands that you are another person. An animal looks and decides whether you are danger, food, or irrelevant. This thing looked at me the way a scientist might look at an unfamiliar insect that had wandered across the table. Not hostile. Not kind. Interested. That was worse than hatred. For a few seconds we faced each other, my truck and that pale wrong thing in the center of the desert highway. The engine idled heavily. The air brakes hissed softly. I could hear the rattle of something loose in the sleeper. I did not reach for the radio. I did not honk. Some instinct told me that making a sound would turn curiosity into action. Then it finished crossing. 3 strides. That was all it took to cover the remaining lane and the shoulder. Its movements were smooth but not graceful, too long and loose, as if gravity had a weaker hold on it than on ordinary bodies. It stepped off the pavement on the right side and into the desert darkness. It should have remained visible for a while. My high beams reached far. The land was open. There was nowhere for something that tall to hide. It vanished as soon as it left the road. Not faded. Not ducked. Gone. Swallowed by the dark between one step and the next. For maybe 10 seconds I sat there, foot on the brake, truck idling in the empty lane. Then my body remembered survival. I shifted, accelerated, and drove through the place where it had crossed without looking left or right. The tires passed over the exact stretch of pavement where its feet had been. I expected something to hit the side of the trailer. I expected to see a pale hand on the passenger window. Nothing happened. I drove until the next truck stopped, nearly an hour away, without easing my grip on the wheel. The old hands were there, as they always are at that hour, men who seemed less like drivers than fixtures of the place, sitting with coffee that had gone cold. I must have looked bad when I walked in, because one of them asked what I had seen before I said a word. I told them. No one laughed. That was when I understood the difference between a story and a warning. A story invites disbelief. A warning does not care if you believe it. The men listened, and one of them, a driver with a face like folded leather, nodded slowly. They cross at night, he said. They crossed before the road was here. Road just gives them something new to pause on. Another asked if it had looked at me. I said yes. The room changed then, in a small way. No one gasped. No one performed fear. But attention tightened. The old driver pushed his coffee away. Don't run that stretch tomorrow night, he said. Take another route if you can. If you can't, stop before dark. I asked why. He looked at me for a while before answering. They remember what interests them. I wanted to dismiss that. Even then, with the image still burning in my mind, I wanted to shrug it off as old road superstition. But his face would not let me. He meant it literally. He meant that something that had lived in that desert long before asphalt could notice a truck, notice a driver, notice being noticed, and come back. I changed my route the next day. It cost me time and fuel and an argument with dispatch. I did not care. For the next year, I avoided that stretch after sundown. Eventually, work took me there in daylight again. The road looked ordinary. Empty desert on both sides. Faded lane markings. A crushed beer can on the shoulder. No sign that anything had ever crossed. But as I passed the place, I saw tracks in the sandy wash beyond the right shoulder. Not tire tracks. Not hoof prints. Not anything I could name. Long impressions, far apart, leading away from the road until the wind erased them. I did not stop to look closely. I knew better by then. People think roads tame a place. They do not. Roads are thin agreements. Lines we draw and maintain and light and name. But the land beneath them remains what it was. The desert does not forget its old paths just because we pave over them. Things that cross before us still cross. Sometimes they pause in the headlights. Sometimes they look at what we built. Sometimes they look at us. If you drive the desert late enough and long enough, you may see something step onto the highway ahead. Slow down if you must. Do not stop. Do not honk. Do not get out. Do not roll down the window. Let it cross. And if it turns its head and looks at you with patient, curious eyes, do not take that road the next night. Because curiosity out there is not harmless. And some things remember. Breathe slowly. The rain has you. We are halfway through the tape now. The ghost town diner. There was one detail about the food that I did not understand until years later. The eggs on my plate were perfect, but too perfect, like the idea of eggs held by a place that had forgotten hunger. The toast glistened with butter that did not melt. The hash browns had crisp edges, but when I nudged them with my fork, the whole portion shifted as one piece, light and dry, as though it were made of ash shaped into food. The diner could reproduce the appearance of being fed. It could offer the ritual. But whatever engine kept it open had no memory of nourishment, only service. I found the money again the next morning. That is the part one rarely include because it sounds invented for effect. I had left bills on the counter, more than enough for the meal I did not eat, and I had watched them remain there as I walked out. At dawn, when I stopped at a rail station 40 miles away, I opened my wallet and saw the same bills folded inside. Not similar bills. The same tear on the corner of the 5. The same ink mark on the 10. They were back where they had been before I entered the diner. I do not know whether the place refused payment, or whether the transaction had never occurred in the world that holds wallets and change. Either possibility unsettles me. The photograph I later found of the waitress did more than prove her face. It showed the diner on a summer afternoon, bright, ordinary, alive. There were people leaning against cars outside, a dog in the dust, a man in a hat shielding his eyes from the sun. Seeing it that way hurt. We talk about haunted places as if they are born frightening, but most of them began as ordinary rooms where people worked, ate, complained, flirted, counted tips, burned toast, and waited for shifts to end. The dead diner was not only a trap. It was a memory of labor and loneliness, repeating the one thing it knew how to do, stay open for travelers. That sympathy is dangerous. I know it is. The dead can be lonely and still harmful. A place can want company without understanding that company must be allowed to leave. But I cannot think of that diner with pure fear. I think of the waitress wiping the counter night after night, hearing the desert wind outside, watching the road for headlights that rarely come. I think of the patrons performing the meal forever because the moment of dying caught them mid-bite, mid-conversation, mid-song. I think of the cook behind the pass, turning food that will never nourish anyone. The sadness of it is a hook too. Maybe that is how it gets the kinder travelers. Once, a few years later, I dreamed I returned. In the dream, I sat at the counter and the waitress poured coffee. She did not ask if I was staying. She only said, "You're older now, Han." The other patrons nodded as if this were expected. The empty booths stretched farther back than the building should have allowed, rows and rows of red seats waiting in warm light. When I woke, the room smelled faintly of coffee and dust. Since then, whenever I pass a diner glowing alone beside a dark road, even a real one, I check the calendar before I order. I was crossing the desert on a back route, well off the main highways, when I came through one of those old ghost towns that appear on maps as if they still deserve names. Most of them are not towns anymore. They are suggestions. A few leaning walls, a collapsed storefront, a rusted water tank, the remains of a main street visible only because the desert has not bothered to fully erase it yet. I had passed several that day, old mining settlements that bloomed and died when the ore ran out. By moonlight they looked almost gentle, bleached and brittle, as if the past had been left outside too long. This one should have been the same. A dead main street. A few false fronts. Empty windows. No power lines that looked functional. No cars. No people. No reason for anyone to stop. But one building had a light on. At the far end of the street, where the road bent around what used to be the town square, a diner glowed in the dark. Neon buzzed in the window, red and blue, spelling open. Chrome trim caught the moonlight. Warm yellow light poured over the dirt street. The sign above the door was missing some letters, but enough remained to make the place seem familiar in that strange way old roadside diners do, as if every one of them is a copy of the same memory. I slowed before I knew I had decided to. I was tired. That is the first excuse. I was hungry. That is the second. I had been driving for hours through emptiness, and the sight of warm light worked on me at a level below judgment. A lit diner means coffee. It means a bathroom. It means another human being awake behind a counter. It means you can step out of the night and be ordinary again. I parked outside. My headlights swept across the rest of the town. The buildings beyond the diner were dead. Roofs caved in. Doors missing. Sand drifted over thresholds. The diner alone looked untouched, as if someone had cut it out of the past and set it down there still running. The bell over the door jingled when I entered. Inside, it was warm. That was the first thing that made me lower my guard. Real warmth. Not the faint warmth of a building holding daytime heat, but the active, enveloping warmth of a kitchen, a grill, coffee pots, bodies. The air smelled of grease, sugar, and burnt coffee. There was a long counter with red stools, booze along the wall, a jukebox glowing softly in the corner, and a waitress wiping the counter with a white cloth. She looked up and smiled. "Sit anywhere, hon." Her voice was ordinary, friendly, tired in the way diner waitresses are tired after a long shift. I wanted so badly for everything to be explainable that I accepted the voice before I accepted the place. I sat at the counter. She poured coffee without asking. "Long road tonight," she said. "Yeah," I answered. "Didn't expect to find anything open out here. Folks say that a lot." The coffee steamed. I wrapped both hands around the mug. The warmth seeped into my fingers. The waitress slid a menu toward me, laminated and worn. Behind the kitchen pass, a cook moved in a white shirt and paper hat, turning something on a grill. 2 booths were occupied. A man in a suit sat hunched over a plate of eggs. A woman with a scarf around her hair stared into a cup of coffee. In the back booth, an older couple sat side by side, not speaking. It was wrong, of course. But wrongness can be gradual if comfort comes first. The diner offered so many ordinary details that my mind hid behind them. The clink of dishes. The hum of refrigeration. The buzz of neon. The waitress's pencil tucked behind her ear. The sugar dispenser sticky under my hand. These things were real. They had texture. Therefore, I told myself, the place must be real too. Then I noticed the calendar. It hung by the register, its paper curled at the edges. The month was July. The year was decades old. I looked away quickly, as if not seeing it might undo it. The jukebox changed songs, except it did not really change. The same old tune began again from the start, a scratchy piece of music I recognized only as belonging to another era. The couple in the booth smiled faintly when it started, as if hearing an old favorite. Their hands rested on the table. Either of them blinked. The waitress returned. "What'll it be?" I ordered something simple because refusing to order felt suddenly dangerous. "Eggs, toast, something like that." She wrote it down, though she did not need to. Her smile remained warm and fixed, and when she turned toward the kitchen, I saw that the hem of her uniform was dusted with fine gray sand. The other patrons never ate. That was what finally stripped away the last of my denial. Their forks moved. Their hands lifted cups. Their bodies performed the gestures of a meal. But the food did not diminish. The coffee did not lower. The man in the suit cut the same piece of egg 3 times and brought an empty fork to his mouth with an expression of mild contentment. The old woman's spoon circled her cup without touching liquid. I looked down at my own coffee. It was real. It was warm. But when I took a second sip, it tasted like dust. Not stale coffee. Not bad water. Dust. Dry, mineral, ancient, the taste of a room sealed for years. The waitress set my plate in front of me. The food looked perfect. Eggs glossy, toast buttered, hash browns crisp at the edges. It smelled of nothing. Not faintly. Not badly. Nothing at all. My stomach turned. You just passing through, Han? She asked. The whole diner seemed to quiet around the question. I looked up. The cook had stopped moving behind the pass. The patrons had turned their heads toward me. Their faces were friendly. That made it worse. There was no malice in the room, or none I could understand. There was loneliness. Terrible loneliness. The kind that fills a place after everyone leaves and the lights somehow remain on. Yes, I said. My voice sounded small. The waitress's smile widened a fraction. Shame. We could always use more folks. Gets lonesome, just us night after night. The man in the suit nodded. The woman with the scarf patted the empty space beside her in the booth. The old couple smiled with patient encouragement. You could stay, the waitress said. Have yourself a seat. Settle in. We'd keep you fed. We'd keep you warm. Road's no good at night anyway. There was a kindness to it that almost undid me. Had it been monstrous, I would have run immediately. Had they hissed or reached for me, fear would have made me fast. But they were gentle. They wanted company. They were a little dead town's little dead diner, keeping the light on in a desert that had forgotten them, and I had walked in from the road like an answer to a prayer. I left money on the counter. I do not know why. Habit, maybe? Courtesy. A desperate need to follow the rules of a diner so the diner would follow the rules of the living world and let me leave. The waitress looked at the bills, then at me. Come back any time, Han, she said. We'll keep the light on. I walked to the door. I did not run until I was outside, and even then I tried not to make it look like running. The bell jingled behind me. The night air hit my face cold and dry. My car sat where I had left it, real and dusty and blessedly modern. I got in, locked the doors, started the engine, and drove. In the mirror, the diner remained lit at the end of the dead street. Its neon open sign buzzed red and blue. Through the windows, I could see the patrons turning back to their plates, the cook moving again, the waitress wiping the counter, all of them settling into the same night they had been living for longer than I could imagine. I researched the town later. I wish I had not. There had been a diner there, yes. It had burned in the 1940s, late at night, with several people inside. A waitress. A cook. A handful of customers trapped when the kitchen fire spread too fast. The town had already been dying then. After the fire, it emptied completely. The article included a photograph. The waitress stood in front of the diner, one hand on her hip, smiling at the camera. Behind her, in the window, was the same neon sign. Open. I have driven past the turnoff only once since then, years later, in daylight. The ghost town was barely there. The diner was a blackened foundation and a few pieces of twisted metal half buried in sand. No chrome. No counter. No booths. No calendar. Nothing that could hold warmth. But on certain maps, if you zoom in far enough, the town still has a name. And somewhere out there, I think, when the desert is dark and a traveler is tired enough, the diner stands again at the end of the dead main street. The grill warms. The coffee turns to dust in the pot. The same song starts over on the jukebox. The waitress wipes the counter and looks up when the bell rings. Sit anywhere, Han? Because the place is lonely. And it keeps the light on. Almost there. Stay soft. The voice on the empty CB. The most unsettling thing about the voice, looking back, is that it helped me before it frightened me. It warned me about the washout. It told me about a dead deer on the shoulder a few miles before I reached it. It even mentioned a patch of crosswind near a dry overpass, and when my trailer shifted there, I was ready. That kind of usefulness builds trust faster than kindness. A threat can be rejected. A helper is harder to refuse. By the time the questions became invasive, some part of me had already accepted the voice as a companion. I later checked whether skip conditions had been possible that night. I learned more about radio propagation than I ever wanted to know. Yes, signals can travel strangely. Yes, atmospheric layers can bend transmissions over impossible distances. But skip does not know the broken mile marker you are passing. It does not react when you reach for the knob. It does not warn you about a washout 2 miles ahead and then ask whether anyone knows your route. Science gave me many interesting facts, and no comfort. The old driver who told me not to answer personal questions had his own story. He said that when he was young, the voice came through during a sandstorm. It asked him to describe his cab, to pass the time. He did, laughing at first, listing the coffee thermos, the cracked photograph taped to the dash, the blanket in the sleeper. The voice repeated each detail back perfectly, then added one he had not mentioned, the small pocket knife under the driver's seat. He had never told anyone about it. Before the signal died, the voice said, "Good, I know where everything is." He drove through the storm without stopping and threw the radio out at the next town. There is an intimacy to being spoken to in isolation. That is why lonely people answer strange voices. In a crowded room, you would reject a stranger asking when you are expected home. In the deep desert, after hours of static, the same question can sound like concern. The voice used that. It wrapped itself in the culture of the road, in jokes and warnings and easy familiarity. It knew how drivers talk. It knew the rhythm of fatigue. It knew that a man alone in a cab will sometimes give away pieces of himself simply because someone asks. I have wondered whether it was truly up ahead, as it claimed. Not physically, perhaps, but in the sense that the road ahead belonged to it. Maybe that is why it asked when I would stop. It did not need to chase a moving truck. It needed me parked, engine off, curtains drawn, half asleep in the sleeper while the radio crackled back on by itself. Maybe the friendly conversation was only the beginning, the polite tapping at the edge of solitude before something came closer. The fact that I never saw it does not make me feel safe. It makes me think I passed through the edge of a territory without stopping long enough for the owner to arrive. These days, if I must drive far at night, I listen to recorded music or nothing at all. A recording cannot notice me. A song cannot ask if I am alone. Static still bothers me. So does any voice that begins too casually out of silence. The worst phrase in the world, to me, remains a warm and friendly "Evening, driver," spoken on an empty road where no one should be near enough to say it. I was driving the desert at night with my CB radio on for company, the way I always did on long, empty hauls. People think truckers use radios only for traffic, police, weather, practical things. We do use them for that. But sometimes the radio is less a tool than a little thread tied to the rest of humanity. Out on those desert stretches, where the highway runs through black country, and there is no cell signal and no other set of headlights for an hour at a time, static can be better than silence. A voice, any voice, can make the cab feel less like a small lit box moving through an endless dead world. That night, the CB had been silent for nearly 2 hours. Not unusual. It was a back route, late, and the big freight traffic usually stayed on the interstate. I kept it on anyway, volume low, letting the occasional crackle fill the spaces between mile markers. Outside the windshield, the road ran flat and straight. The moon was down. The only things visible were the lane lines, the shoulders, and now and then the pale skeleton of a roadside sign appearing and vanishing in the beams. Then a voice came through. "Evening, driver." I almost jumped. The voice was clear, close, and friendly, the casual drawl of someone bored and glad to talk. I grabbed the mic. "Evening. Didn't think anybody else was out here. Road's never as empty as it looks," he said. I laughed because that sounded like something a driver would say. We talked for a while. Ordinary road talk. Weather behind me, road conditions ahead, where I was coming from, where he claimed to be headed. His signal stayed strong, with only a little static curling around the edges. I felt myself relax. The cab seemed warmer. The darkness outside less complete. After 10 minutes, I asked where he was. "Just up ahead," he said. "Few miles." I looked through the windshield. Nothing. The road ran straight for miles. If a truck had been ahead of me, I should have seen taillights, marker lights, any glow at all. The desert was flat, no hills to hide behind. I checked the mirrors. Nothing behind me either. "You running dark?" I asked, trying to make it sound like a joke. He chuckled. "You could say that." That was the first time I felt uneasy. The range on a CB is not infinite. A clear signal like that should have meant another vehicle close by. Maybe over a ridge, maybe around a bend, but not invisible on a straight desert road. I told myself the atmosphere was bouncing signals strangely. It happens. Skit can carry voices from far away under the right conditions. Truckers have spoken to people in other states on weird nights. That explanation calmed me for about 30 seconds. Then he said, "You got a soft right coming in 2 miles. Watch the shoulder. Wash out there." 2 miles later, the road curved gently right. On the shoulder, exactly where he said, a washout had eaten into the pavement. I swerved left, heart kicking. "Appreciate the warning," I said. "Wouldn't want you stopping out here," he answered. The way he said it made the words feel larger than they should have. I drove another few miles, scanning for lights ahead. Still nothing. The voice kept talking. Friendly. Easy. Too easy, maybe, because now I heard the structure underneath the conversation. He asked little questions. How long had I been on the road? Was I running solo? Did dispatch know this route? Did I have anyone waiting on the other end? Was I tired? Had I thought about pulling over? At first, those are normal questions. Drivers ask them. We compare schedules and fatigue and bad dispatch decisions. But his questions gathered weight. They became inventory. He was not making conversation. He was measuring my aloneness. I stopped answering directly. "You're quiet now," he said. "Just watching the road." "Good idea. Lot of things step out in the desert." The radio hissed softly. I saw no truck. No car. No sign of anyone. Yet he knew the curve before I reached it. He knew the washout. Once, as I passed the mile marker with its numbers half shot away, he said, "Hard to read that one, isn't it?" and laughed. My mouth went dry. "Where are you exactly?" I asked. "Up ahead." "How far?" "Close enough." The voice remained warm. That was the worst part. If it had become demonic, cold, distorted, I could have turned the radio off easily. But it sounded like a man who might buy you coffee at a truck stop. A man with stories. A man awake in the same lonely night. Loneliness is a hook, and the desert knows how to bait it. I reached for the volume knob. Before I touched it, he said, "Don't do that." I froze. There was a long pause filled only with static and engine hum. Then he laughed softly. Kidding, driver? You do what you like. I turned the CB off. The cab went silent so suddenly that it felt as if something had been removed from the air. I exhaled. My hands were shaking. For a few miles, nothing happened. No voice. No lights. Just road. I told myself I had overreacted. Maybe Skip. Maybe a prank. Maybe another driver on a parallel service road I could not see. Then the CB turned itself back on. Not with a click I could blame on a loose switch. Not because my hand brushed it. The speaker crackled, the display glowed, and the voice came through, still friendly, though softer now. Don't go quiet on me. We were just getting to know each other. I nearly lost control of the truck. The tires crossed the rumble strip and roared. I corrected, hard hammering. The voice continued. I'm right up ahead. I'll see you soon. The radio went dead. This time the display went dark too. I did not touch it again. For the next 40 miles, I drove faster than I should have and slower than fear wanted me to. I watched the road ahead so intensely my eyes watered. Every dark shape on the shoulder became a person. Every reflector became eyes. Every patch of blacked out beyond my headlights felt like a mouth opening. There was nothing up ahead. No truck. No man. No vehicle running without lights. Nothing waiting in the lane. Nothing at all. That should have comforted me. It did not. Because the voice had not said he would be visible. It had said he would see me soon. I did not stop until I reached a town with a 24-hour station and 3 other trucks parked under lights. When I climbed down from the cab, my knees nearly failed. I checked the CB. It was off. The switch was off. The wiring later tested fine. No short. No explanation. A week later, another driver mentioned the empty CB voice without knowing my story. He said there were stretches where something came through pretending to be a driver. Friendly at first. Helpful even. It warned you about hazards so you would trust it. Then it asked questions. The old-timers said you should never answer anything personal and never say you are alone. Why? I asked, though I knew. He shrugged. Because then it knows. I do not drive with the CB on in the deep desert anymore. People tell me that is unsafe. Maybe it is. But I would rather have ordinary silence than a friendly voice that knows the road too well and wants to know me better. If a radio speaks where no one should be in range, be polite if you must. Thank it for the road warning. Do not tell it your name. Do not tell it your route. Do not say you are tired. Do not say you are alone. And if it asks whether anyone will miss you, turn it off. Even if it turns itself back on. 2 more. Let your breathing slow with the rain. The stars that watch. After I left, I tried to identify the 9 lights from memory. I downloaded star maps, checked planet positions, looked up satellites and aircraft corridors. That is what frightened people do in daylight. They build a courtroom and put the impossible on trial. The evidence was poor. I could not name exact coordinates. I had not photographed the sky because I had gone there to experience it, not document it. But I knew enough to know that satellites move. Planets do not gather attention. Aircraft blink. And no known object waits for a camper to stand before seeming to come closer. The chair I left behind became an obsession. It was cheap, the kind that folds into a bag, not worth retrieving. Still, I thought about it sitting there under that sky after I fled. I imagined morning sunlight revealing it alone on the sand, ordinary and silly. Then I imagined something else. The chair turned slightly upward, as if someone had sat in it after me and leaned back to look at the stars. 2 weeks later, I drove within 20 miles of the campsite in daylight, and nearly turned down the dirt road to recover it. I could not make myself do it. The idea of finding the chair occupied by absence was worse than losing it. A ranger I spoke to months later told me campers sometimes report attention panic under very dark skies. He used that phrase gently, not dismissively. The brain, he said, is not built for that many stars. It searches for pattern and agency. It can transform awe into fear. I nodded and thanked him because he was offering kindness, and kindness deserves respect. But when I asked whether people ever reported specific stars growing brighter after being noticed, his expression changed. He said, "Best thing to do out there is not stare at anything too long." Then he found a reason to end the conversation. There is a difference between feeling small and feeling selected. The first can be beautiful. The second is terror. Under that sky, at first, I was a speck among countless lights, and that made my problems feel wonderfully unimportant. Then the 9 lights changed the arrangement. The universe was no longer vast and indifferent. Part of it had turned its attention toward me. I was still small, but now I was specific. A small thing seen. A small thing marked. That is not humility. That is exposure. Sometimes, in cities, I look up through the washed-out orange haze and feel grateful for light pollution. People call it a loss, and it is. We have dimmed the heavens with our little lamps. We have hidden wonder from ourselves. But we have also hidden ourselves from wonder, and perhaps that is not always bad. Streetlights make the sky shallow. They keep the old dark distance from becoming too intimate. They prevent us from noticing the wrong points of light and being noticed in return. I sleep better under a sky that cannot see me clearly. I went out into the deep desert to camp alone and see the stars. That was the whole purpose of the trip. No ghost towns, no hikes, no spiritual retreat, no dramatic reason. I wanted dark sky. Real dark sky. The kind you cannot find near cities, or suburbs, or even most rural towns anymore. I had seen photographs of the Milky Way taken in the desert, that great white river of stars spilled across blackness, and I wanted to stand under it with my own eyes. I chose a place far from paved roads, checked the weather, brought too much water, and drove until the last signal bars vanished from my phone. By late afternoon, I had reached a flat stretch of desert between low hills. No buildings. No tire tracks except my own. No distant towers. Nothing that would glow after sunset. The silence was enormous even before dark. I set up camp as the heat drained out of the land. A small tent. A stove. A chair. Nothing elaborate. The sunset burned orange, then purple, then left the world in silver and blue. One by one, stars appeared. Then all at once, there were too many to count. I had never seen anything like it. The sky did not look decorated with stars, it looked made of them. They crowded every inch of darkness, layered deep, bright enough that the ground around me took on shape without a lantern. The Milky Way arched overhead like smoke frozen in place. I lay on my back on a blanket beside the tent and felt, for a while, the cleanest wonder I have ever known. It is difficult to be afraid while looking at something that beautiful. That may be why the fear, when it came, felt almost like a betrayal. I do not know when I first noticed that some of the stars were different. There was no sudden movement, no dramatic sign. Just a growing discomfort, the way you might slowly realize someone in a room has been staring at you. At first you do not know how you know. You simply feel the weight of attention. I focused on the sky. Most of the stars twinkled faintly. Their light shifted in the high air, but a few did not. A handful scattered across the sky remained steady. Too steady. Not brighter at first, not larger, just fixed in a way that felt deliberate. I tried to compare them to planets. Planets are steady. Planets do not twinkle like stars. That explanation might have worked if there had been one or two. There were 9. I counted them because counting made the experience feel scientific. 9 points of light that did not tremble, did not sparkle, and somehow seemed turned toward me. The idea was absurd. Stars cannot look. Light cannot have attention. The feeling of being watched is a primitive instinct, useful with animals and people, useless with the sky. I laughed at myself. Alone, under the greatest sky I had ever seen, I laughed softly and said, "Get a grip." The 9 lights remained steady. After a few minutes, I shifted position on the blanket, turning my head away from one part of the sky to look at another. The feeling followed. Not from all directions. From those 9 points. I knew where they were without searching. My awareness snagged on them again and again. Then one of them brightened. Only slightly. I sat up. The desert around me was silent. No wind. No insects. The cooling metal of my car ticked once and then stopped. Above me, the watching star held its new brightness. Another brightened. Then another. I told myself clouds or atmosphere were altering the view, but the real stars around them seemed unchanged. If anything, the rest of the sky appeared to dim by comparison. The 9 points were not merely brighter now. They were larger. Very slowly, almost too slowly to notice from moment to moment, they were growing. Coming closer. That was the thought, and once it arrived, it would not leave. The watching lights were descending. Or approaching. Or the distance between me and them no longer meant what distance should mean. The sky, which had felt vast and majestic, suddenly felt like a ceiling with holes in it, and through a few of those holes something was leaning down to look. I stood. The movement seemed to intensify the attention. I felt it on my face, my shoulders, the back of my neck. I did not want to look up, but I could not stop myself. The 9 lights were brighter still. Not falling like meteors. Not streaking. No trails. They simply grew, patient and steady, as if the act of being noticed had given them permission to come nearer. I packed in panic. Anyone who has broken down a campsite in the dark knows how clumsy it is even under ordinary fear. Stakes vanish. Zippers catch. Small objects disappear under your own knees. I shoved things into bags without folding them. The stove went into the trunk still smelling faintly of fuel. The chair stayed behind. I could feel the lights above me the whole time, and every instinct insisted that looking up would make it worse. So I did not look. That became the rule. Do not look up. Keep your eyes on the ground. Keep moving. Get in the car. Start the engine. Follow your own tire tracks out. Halfway through stuffing the tent into the back seat, I heard a sound. Not from the sky. From around me. A faint clicking in the desert. It came from many directions at once, dry and delicate, like small stones tapping together. I froze. The clicking stopped. When I moved again, it resumed, matching the rhythm of my movements. Pack. Click click. Step. Click. Door handle. Click click click. It was as if the desert itself had become interested. I got into the car and started the engine. The headlights blasted the ground ahead, flattening the scrub into harsh shadows. I reversed too fast, nearly hit a rock, corrected, and followed the faint path my tires had made in the sand earlier. Only when I reached the rough dirt track did I glance in the rearview mirror. Above the place where my camp had been, 9 lights hung lower than stars should ever hang. They were not in the sky exactly. They were above the desert, high but near, arranged in the same scattered pattern. They cast no beams. They illuminated nothing. Yet I could see them clearly, and beneath them, for a second, I thought I saw long shadows moving across the ground without bodies to make them. I drove. The dirt road seemed longer leaving than it had arriving. The car bumped and rattled. Twice I nearly followed the wrong wash. My phone had no signal, of course. The GPS map spun uselessly for a while before finding itself. I kept my eyes on the headlights and refused to look up through the windshield. But I could see reflections. Tiny points of light appeared in the glass, not where stars should reflect, but clustered near the top edge of the windshield. As the road curved, they stayed in place relative to me. Watching through the glass, I said, "I'm leaving." The words sounded ridiculous and necessary. The lights did not answer. After nearly an hour, I reached pavement. Far ahead, beyond a low ridge, I saw the faint dirty glow of a town. Sodium lamps, porch lights, a gas station canopy. Human light. The reflections in the windshield dimmed. By the time I reached the town, the sky overhead was ordinary again. Starry, yes, but distant. Uninterested. I parked under a street light and finally looked up. I could not identify the 9 watching lights. Maybe they had returned to wherever they had been. Maybe the town's glow hid them. Maybe they were still there, looking at someone else lying alone in the desert with wonder on their face. I have not camped under a truly dark sky since. People tell me that is a shame, and they are right. It is a shame. The desert stars were beautiful before they became aware. But beauty does not make something safe. The deep sky is like the deep ocean in that way. We admire the surface because we cannot bear the thought of what might move behind it. If you go out into the dark desert to see the stars, enjoy them. Let them humble you. Let them make you feel small in the old good way. But if a few points of light seem too steady, do not count them. Do not focus. Do not let them become certain that you have noticed. Because noticing is a kind of invitation. And some stars are not as far away as they pretend to be. Last one now. Let this be the one you fall asleep to. The one who walks beside the car. There was a second mark on the car that I did not find until the buyer pointed it out during the sale. On the passenger side, low near the rear door, the dust had been disturbed in a long brushing line, as if something had kept one hand lightly against the car while running. Not gripping. Not trying to pull it open. Just touching. The line ran almost the full length of the side panel, steady and level despite all the vibrations of that terrible drive. I had washed the car twice by then, but under certain light the trace remained, not scratched into paint, exactly, more like the finish itself remembered contact. The man who bought the car asked if I had driven through brush. I said yes. It was easier. He did not buy the car in the end. He stood for a while looking at the passenger window, then said he had changed his mind. Maybe he sensed something in my face. Maybe the car had become the kind of object that carries a story even when no one tells it. I traded it in later at a dealership where no one asked questions beyond mileage and service records. I felt guilty for that, as if I had passed on not a vehicle but a place beside a vehicle, an empty running space that something might remember. For a long time after, I could not sit in the passenger seat of any car at night. Driving was easier because the wheel gave me purpose. As a passenger, I had nothing to do but look out the side window, and the side window had become a screen for dread. Every reflector, every fence post, Every pale roadside weed sliding past in headlight spill became, for a fraction of a second, a long leg or a tilted head. Friends noticed. They thought I was anxious about accidents. That was close enough to truth that I let them believe it. I also began to pay attention to stories from other drivers, especially women driving alone at night, because they were more likely to admit to fear without dressing it up as a joke. I heard variations. A runner beside the car on a reservation road. A pale man keeping pace with a bus until sunrise. A child-shaped thing sprinting alongside a pickup, laughing without sound. Not all in the same desert, not all described the same way, but the pattern was familiar. Impossible speed, no attempt to attack, a period of accompaniment, departure at the edge of lights. These accounts made me feel less insane and more afraid. A hallucination can be yours alone. A pattern belongs to the world. Sometimes I wonder whether the figure is bound to the desert or to the act of lonely travel itself. Maybe roads create opportunities for contact. A car is isolation in motion, a private room crossing open land, and perhaps some things are drawn to that contradiction. We think of ourselves as protected because we are enclosed, but a window is not a wall in any meaningful spiritual sense. It lets seeing happen both ways. For 30 miles, I looked at the figure and it looked at me, and that shared gaze may have been the real journey. The road was only the place where it occurred. I was driving across the desert alone at night, fast, the way people drive when the road is empty and the next town is only an idea on the map. It was not reckless at first. The highway was straight, dry, and vacant. 80 miles an hour felt natural. 90 felt like the road wanted it. There were no headlights ahead, none behind, and the desert on both sides was only a black absence under a moonless sky. The car's cabin had that late-night feeling of being separate from the world, a small moving room of dashboard glow, stale coffee, and warm air. I had been on the road long enough for thoughts to loosen. Not sleepiness, exactly. More like the trance that comes when the scenery stops changing. The same dashed lines. The same reflectors. The same low brush appearing at the edge of the headlights and snapping back into darkness. My mind wandered. I thought about work, about the motel I hoped to reach, about whether the gas in the tank would be enough if the station at the next town was closed. Then, at the edge of my vision, something moved beside the car. A pale flicker on the passenger side, out beyond the shoulder. I glanced over, expecting a reflection in the window. Maybe the light of the dashboard on the glass. Maybe a signpost passing. Maybe nothing. There was a figure running beside me. It was just off the road, on the desert floor, keeping pace with the passenger door. For a second, my mind did not understand speed. It saw a roughly human-shaped running and accepted the category before remembering that I was traveling nearly 90 miles an hour. Nothing should have been able to run there. Nothing should have been able to keep up for even one step. The ground beyond the shoulder was uneven scrub and sand. A person would have fallen immediately. An animal would have vanished behind me in a blink. But the figure remained. It was upright, long-limbed, pale enough to catch the spill from my headlights and hold it in a dull way. Its legs moved in a rhythm that resembled running only if you looked quickly. The stride was too long, the joints too loose, the torso too still. It seemed less to strike the ground than to touch it lightly and be carried forward. Sand and brush did not slow it. It ran over the desert as if the land were smooth. I shouted and jerked the wheel. The tires crossed the center line. I corrected before the car spun, heart slamming so hard it hurt. The figure stayed beside me, not reacting, not lunging, not falling back. It simply turned its head toward the window. I saw its face. Or rather, I saw the place where a face should have been resolving itself in the dark. Pale plains. Deep shadows. Eyes that reflected no light but were somehow visible. It watched me with the same patient interest you might give someone walking beside you on a quiet path. That was perhaps the worst part. It did not look strained. It did not look hungry. It looked companionable. I pressed the accelerator. The car surged. 95. 100. The engine roared. Wind battered the frame. The figure adjusted without effort, lengthening its stride slightly. It remained beside the passenger door, head turned, watching me through the glass. I told myself to keep looking forward. Crashing would kill me faster than the thing outside. But my eyes kept dragging sideways. Every time I looked, it was there, matching me. It ran close enough that if the window had been down, I imagined I could have smelled it. Dust, maybe. Cold stone. Something kept underground. At 110, the car began to tremble in a way that told me physics, at least, still existed. The figure outside seemed untroubled by physics. It paced me exactly. Not gaining. Not falling back. Staying in the one place where I could not forget it. After several miles, an understanding came over me that was more frightening than the chase. It was not chasing me. Chasing implies desire to catch. This thing could have caught me if it wanted. Anything that could run at that speed over open desert could have stepped in front of the car, slammed into the side, reached the door, done whatever it wished. It did none of those things. It accompanied me. It had seen a lonely car crossing its desert and decided, for reasons of its own, to run beside it. To watch the person inside. To share the road without using the road. There is a special terror in being interesting to something that has no need of you. I tried slowing down. The figure slowed with me. 80. 60. 50. Its stride shortened. It remained beside the door, patient as ever. That was worse than speed. At high speed, fear had momentum. At 50, with the thing still there, I imagined it keeping pace all the way down to walking speed, then standing beside the car when I stopped, waiting politely for me to roll down the window. I accelerated again. It stayed. For 30 miles, it ran beside me. I know because I counted mile markers. Counting gave my mind a railing to hold. 1 mile with it beside me. 5. 12. 17. Each marker flashed by and the figure remained. Sometimes it drifted a little farther from the road, vanishing almost completely into darkness, and hope would flare in my chest. Then it would glide back into the spill of headlights, still watching. Once, very gently, it lifted one long hand. Not a wave exactly. More like a greeting offered late. I did not wave back. Something in me knew not to acknowledge it more than I already had. I kept both hands on the wheel and stared forward until my eyes burned. Far ahead, after an eternity of road, I saw the first glow of a town. Small. Low. Real. A gas station sign. A few street lights. The faint blocky shapes of buildings. Human geometry. Human electricity. I could have wept. The figure saw it too. I know because its head turned away from me for the first time and toward the glow ahead. Its stride changed. Not faltering, but considering. As the town lights grew closer, the figure drifted farther from the car, toward the edge of the headlight spill. At the boundary where the first streetlight cast its weak amber reach onto the desert shoulder, the figure slowed. I sped into the edge of town. The figure stopped in the darkness just beyond the last reach of light. For one moment, I saw it standing there in the desert, pale and tall, facing the road, watching me leave. It did not seem angry. It seemed patient, almost thoughtful, as if the 30 miles we had shared were enough for now. Then the streetlights took over, and it was gone. I pulled into the first open gas station and parked under the canopy. I did not need gas. I needed light. I sat there until morning while a clerk inside pretended not to notice me staring out at the dark beyond the pumps. At dawn, I walked around the passenger side of the car. There was dust on the window. Not unusual after a desert drive. But in that dust, near the glass where its face had watched mine, there were long, faint marks. 4 of them. Not scratches. Not deep enough for that. Just lines drawn through the dust from outside, as if fingertips had rested there for a moment, while keeping pace at impossible speed. I sold the car a month later. That is not rational, I know. The car had done nothing wrong. But I could not drive with that passenger window beside me anymore. I could not stop glancing at it, especially at night, expecting pale movement to appear just beyond my reflection. Years have passed. I have not driven that road again. Sometimes I think about the figure in ways that disturb me because not all the thoughts are fearful. There was something lonely in its accompaniment. Something almost curious and gentle, if gentleness can exist in a thing that runs through desert darkness at 100 miles an hour. It did not harm me. It did not try to stop me. It ran beside me for 30 miles and let me go when I reached the lights. But that does not make it safe. A deep place in the world can be patient without being kind. A thing can be curious without being harmless. And a companion on a lonely road can still be something you should never invite closer. I wonder about the drivers who meet it on roads without towns ahead. That thought returns to me most often. What happens when there is no gas station glow, no streetlight boundary, no human light for it to stop at? What happens when the road runs another 200 miles through empty country, and the pale figure settles beside the passenger door, tireless, interested, content to run all night? Does it eventually tap the glass? Does it wait for the driver to run out of fuel? Does it remain beside the car when the engine dies, no longer running, simply standing there in the dark, looking in? I do not know. I only know that out in the desert, on certain roads, there is someone who walks beside the car, or runs, or accompanies. It keeps pace with lonely travelers under moonless skies, watching them through the window with patient eyes. If you ever see movement beside you where nothing should be able to move, do not speed up forever. Do not slow to a stop. Do not roll down the window. Do not wave. Drive toward the nearest lights. And pray there are lights ahead. That's all the tapes for tonight. You made it to the end, or maybe you drifted off somewhere along the way, out under that big dark sky, with the road humming softly beneath you and the desert held far away by sleep. That is all right. That is what this is for. The stories are done now. There is nothing left but the rain and the dark is just the dark. You are not out in the desert tonight. You are not low on gas on a road that promises mercy. You are not watching a hitchhiker stay always ahead. You are not hearing a friendly voice come through a radio that should be silent. You are not beneath the watching stars, or driving with something pale beside the car. You are home. There are walls close around you. There is a ceiling above you, not an endless sky. There is a door, and it is locked. There are no miles of emptiness stretching away in every direction. Only the soft rain on the roof. Only the room around you. Only your breathing, slow and steady, as the night settles back into something ordinary. Let your shoulders go heavy. Let your hands unclench. Let the road disappear. If any image from these stories lingers at the edge of your mind, Let it pass like headlights far away on another highway. It is not coming here. The lights in the distance are only lights. The signs outside are only signs. The radio is silent. The stars are far away. The desert is somewhere else entirely, and it cannot reach you through the rain. If you are still awake, let the room remind you where you are. Feel the mattress under you, not a driver's seat. Hear rain, not gravel under tires. The roof above you is close and ordinary. The horizon is not visible from here. There is no sign ahead promising one more mile, no pale figure pacing the passenger door, no diner glowing at the end of a dead main street. The stories have gone back where stories go when they are finished, into the distance. They cannot open the door. They cannot turn the radio on. They cannot make you look at the stars. For now, the empty places are only places inside the tape. The long road is a thought, not a direction. The gas gauge is not falling. The lights on your horizon are not moving. Even if some part of your mind is still out there, watching a line of highway vanish into blackness, let that image soften until it is only a painted backdrop, far away and harmless. You do not have to reach the next town tonight. You do not have to keep your hands on the wheel. You do not have to decide whether to stop for anyone or anything. You can let the engine fade. You can let the headlights dim. You can let the whole desert become quiet behind closed eyes. The safest thing about a story is that it knows where to end. Real roads do not always give you that mercy. They continue past the last light and over the next rise and into whatever waits beyond the beams. But a story can close the distance for you. It can bring you home in the final lines, back to rain, back to walls, back to the locked door and the familiar dark. So let this one end properly. Let the desert stay outside the mind's window. Let the rain cover its tracks. Let sleep be the town whose lights nothing strange can enter. Sleep is its own safe town, bright in the dark, and you are allowed to drive toward it now. Not urgently. Not chased. Just gently, with the road smoothing out beneath you, the desert falling behind, and the rain washing the dust from every window. There are more tapes waiting, always. But for now, rest. Sleep well. And I will see you again, next time, after midnight.